He Chengdi went completely still thanks to Chu Lian's actions. He stared at her with a dark expression on his face. He was absolutely certain that this young, beautiful wife before him was the same Chu Lian from his previous life, because they looked exactly the same. However, why was there such a difference in their personalities? The wicked woman Chu Lian, from his previous life, would never have come this close to him. If she had to choose between him and Hao Bojian, she would have picked Hao Bojian without any hesitation. However, if she wasn't Chu Lian from his previous life, why would she meet in secret with Hao Bojian? The more he Sanlang pondered, the darker the look in his eyes. Finally, he inwardly shook his head and laughed at himself. Of course, she was the same wicked woman as before. She simply learned how to hide her true self better this time. Chu Lian noticed the sudden change in He Sanlang's face, so she stopped trying to tease him and sat properly by his side. He Chengdi brushed away some non-existent dirt on his clothes. Then, intending to ridicule her, he said, "It's only been 3 days since we've gotten married. Who would have known that my dear wife had someone else in her thoughts this whole time?" Chu Lian frowned as she turned to look at He Sanlang. "My dear husband, what are you talking about? I can't seem to understand you." "Hey I didn't realize that you'd gotten better at acting. Chu Lian, let's see how long you'll keep this up for." Right after he finished speaking, He Sanlang sat in the corner with his eyes closed, clearly ignoring Chu Lian. He treated the pretty little wife by his side as if she was made of air. Chu Lian didn't bother herself with him. He Sanlang obviously had a huge bias against her. Trying to make nice with him now would only cause the opposite effect. Why not simply ignore him and take a break? She was pretty tired from spending the whole day making conversation with the womenfolk of House Ying. After all, Chu Lian sunk into silence, but the rage in He Chengdi's heart only grew. He sneered in his heart. Heh. As expected, although she had been acting as if she didn't care, she was still thinking about Hao Wujing in her heart. Let's see how long you can keep pretending. Sooner or later, the day will come when Zhao Wujing falls into his hands. By then, he'd like to see if Chu Lian could still remain calm. Chu Lian wasn't thinking as deeply as he was. She had been completely tired out by the visit today. The carriage rode stably over the broad, paved roads. The gentle shaking lulled Chu Lian to sleep in no time at all. He Sanlang had his eyes closed as he mulled over things in his head. Suddenly, something heavy fell onto his shoulder and he could feel slow, regular breaths blowing against his neck. He immediately froze. Upon opening his eyes, he cast a deep, darkened gaze downward, only to see Chu Lian sleeping defenselessly on his shoulder. The woman by his side had a serene expression on in her sleep, her lips slightly tilted upwards. She looked like a defenseless child. If he hadn't seen how ruthless she could be in his previous life, he might have thought that she could be a good wife to him. As his thoughts ran back to the various events that had happened in the past, the calm and gentle expression on He Sanlang's face disappeared in a flash. He tried to shuffle away in disdain, but Chu Lian was like jelly, clinging onto him. He Chengdi couldn't bear with it any longer and reached out to push at her. After Chu Lian's head was pushed away, she frowned in dissatisfaction and mumbled something he couldn't make out before rolling back onto He Sanlang's body. His mouth twitched and he quickly dodged her. This time, Chu Lian didn't land on his shoulder. Instead, her head fell onto his thigh. He Sanlang was completely speechless towards this woman. She managed to sleep through all of that like a dead pig, so why couldn't she just sleep herself to death? This time, He Sanlang was too lazy to bother with her. Chu Lian slept especially well while lying on He Sanlang's thigh. After about an hour, as they were about to reach the entrance of the Jinggan estate, He Sanlang suddenly felt something wet on his thigh. He lowered his gaze to look and found that it was actually Chu Lian's drool. He Sanlang, although he tried to suppress the building rage within his chest, he couldn't hold back any longer. He Sanlang pushed Chu Lian away with enough force to make the sleeping Chu Lian almost fall onto the carpet of the carriage. This time, Chu Lian jolted awake. She looked around in confusion before realizing that she was still in the carriage. There was some suspicious wetness at the corner of her mouth. Chu Lian blushed deeply before taking out a handkerchief and quickly wiping it off. Next, she noticed that He Changdi was looking at her with anger, and maybe even the slight hint of a grudge. She faintly recalled that she had been sleeping on He Changdi's thigh, and she had been drooling. Her eyes couldn't resist drifting in the direction of He Changdi's thigh. It was close to summer now, and the weather was turning warm, so they were all wearing cool spring clothes. He Changdi was wearing a thin, light blue robe with embroidered flowers. It looked both low-key and luxurious, matching his calm, aloof aura perfectly. From afar, he looked like a mountain flower that no one could profane. However, on that completely unwrinkled silk brocade robe of his, there was a wet patch about half the size of a palm near the crotch area. The position was a little awkward, and it would be extremely easy for others to misunderstand. If it had been a dark-colored robe, it wouldn't have been too obvious. But the wet patch stood stark against the light-colored robe. It only took one glance for Chu Lian to realize she had caused some trouble this time. The corner of her eye twitched. She hurriedly hid in the corner like an ostrich, moving as far away from He Changdi as she could and pretending she hadn't seen anything. He Changdi's expression had turned completely black. He had the sudden urge to beat Chu Lian up, but he had never hit a woman before. It was part of the He family principles to never harm a lady. He snatched the handkerchief in Chu Lian's hands away, and scrubbed at the suspicious mark on his robe. However, he didn't realize that Chu Lian had already used the handkerchief to wipe her mouth, so he ended up making the wet patch even bigger. He Changdi threw the handkerchief to the floor. This time, his face was so black, it could probably drip ink. He was about to ridicule Chu Lian when he heard Liu announce from outside the carriage, "Third young master, third young madam, we've reached the entrance of the estate. Senior servant Liu and eldest young madam are waiting to welcome us at the entrance." Following that, the carriage came to a stop. Since eldest sister-in-law had personally come out to welcome the couple back home, it would be rude if they didn't get out of the carriage to meet her. He Changdi's hopes of ordering Liu to drive the carriage all the way back to their courtyard were dashed. The atmosphere in the carriage was tense and strange. Chu Lian couldn't withstand the deathly look that He Sanlang was sending her, so she pushed aside the curtains of the carriage and alighted. Madame Zhu was already waiting by the side of the carriage. Matriarch He had been worried that He Sanlang might have drunk too much at the Ying estate, so she had sent her eldest granddaughter-in-law and senior servant Liu out to receive them. When Madame Zhu saw Xian helping Chu Lian out of the carriage, she was stunned for a moment. Following that, a blush spread on her face. Senior servant Liu coughed twice, a smile shining in her eyes. Chu Lian didn't know why they seemed to be trying but failing to hold back their smiles upon seeing her. The attentive Xian had also flushed red. She hurriedly tidied up Chu Lian's clothes and adjusted the accessories on her head. By this time, He Sanlang had finally alighted from the carriage after dawdling as much as he could. After noticing Chu Lian's disorderly appearance, Madame Zhu and senior servant Liu couldn't help but glance at He Sanlang. When they saw the wet patch on He Sanlang's clothes, Madame Zhu almost choked on air while senior servant Liu's eyes merely crinkled upwards. She was already an old woman, there was nothing she hadn't seen before. She reacted quickly and walked to He Sanlang's side to help block the onlookers' gazes. He Sanlang's hands were trembling with the force of his rage. He wanted to strangle Chu Lian on the spot. It was all that wicked woman's fault. He had been completely embarrassed in front of his seniors.